All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Rowena. My name is Rowena Camo, and I'm a consultant working with the California Child Care Resource and Referral Network. And I'm joined by my co-presenter, Natalie Rivera. Do you want to introduce yourself, Natalie?
Yes, thank you, Rowena. Good morning, everyone. My name is Natalie Rivera. I am the Research and Policy Associate here at the California Child Care Resource and Referral Network, and excited to be here with you all today.
Thank you. And we're also joined by Marnie Silk. Marnie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Marnie Silk. I'm the new research manager for the network. I'm connecting data with research for advocacy and public policy analysis, designing and managing the network's research projects, and also procuring grants for the policy and research departments. And I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, so we're so excited to release the 2023 California Child Care Portfolio. And today we'll share highlights from the report as well as policy priorities based on our findings. The full report, which includes the statewide and county by county data, will be available on the California Child Care Resource and Referral website later today. Throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature. We may have some time at the end to answer some of your questions. So the R&R Network has a long history with the child care portfolio, having produced the biennial child care portfolio since 1997. The report presents a unique portrait of the licensed child care landscape, including supply, demand, costs, as well as supplemental information on populations, poverty, and family budgets. The data that we collect for the child care data, the licensed child care supply and request data, come from our California Child Care Resource and Referral agencies. The supply data is a snapshot in time collected during the spring of 2023, and the request data is a 3-month snapshot collected again also in 2023 between the months of April and June. We also have additional child and family data supplementing the child care data that include information on population, poverty, and family budgets. This data was collected from a variety of data sources, including the American Community Survey, the Economic Policy Institute, kidsdata.org, and other places. And just a quick note that for for R&R agencies who were not unable to submit the child care data, we used information from the Department of Social Services Community Care Licensing. And now I'm going to turn it over to Natalie Rivera to talk a little bit more about child care resource and referral.
Thank you, Rowena, for that background and data collection explanation. So for those of you who are not familiar with the network or R&R agencies, the California Child Care Resource and Referral Network is a membership organization of child care resource and referral, also known as R&R agencies across California that work together to help families find accessible, affordable, and quality child care, as well as access to information, resources, and support that meets their diverse needs. And R&R agencies are state funded by the California Department of Social Services. They are community-based programs that exist in every county in California. R&Rs make up a well-developed system that supports families, childcare providers, and local communities with childcare information and resources. So this does describe R&Rs in a nutshell, but they do so much for the community. And we would be here all morning if I detailed all of the numerous things that R&Rs do to support their communities. And our childcare data does come directly from the local R&Rs, and as Rowena described, are a snapshot in time. R&Rs do have the most up-to-date and comprehensive information on licensed care in California and include information on small FCCs, which are protected, and so data are not publicly available for small FCCs. And our research team does an extensive checks and cleaning process of the data with a lot of communication with the R&Rs to ensure that the data are as accurate as possible. So now let's get into the data. So the network has been collecting childcare data through the Data Standardization Project since 1996. And this has allowed us to have a longitudinal view of licensed childcare in California. And you'll see here that California was steadily increasing in its childcare supply up until the Great Recession, so in 2008, which had a huge impact on family childcare homes particularly. And family childcare homes are small businesses run out of individuals' homes. And after seeing declines in the past few years due to the impacts of the pandemic, we're finally seeing a pivot upward. So these last data points are our 2023 data. So there were 718,815 childcare center spaces and 271,517 family childcare home spaces. And historically, FCCs or family childcare homes saw bigger declines each year since the recession. But this year, we did see a small increase in the number of FCC spaces compared to 2021 and even compared to pre-pandemic numbers. And as we'll discuss in the following slides, licensed center spaces also saw an increase compared to previous years, with the biggest year-over-year increase since 2006. So while there was a slight increase in the overall licensed capacity, kidsdata.org estimates that of children 0 to 12 in working families, only 26% have a licensed childcare space available to them. And as for the other 74% of children, it is likely that they are cared for by a family friend or neighbor, also known as FFN, which are in-home care providers like nannies or other license exempt center settings. So here we're looking at change in licensed center supply from 2021 to 2023. So we're comparing 2021 portfolio data to our most recent 2023 data. And there was an overall increase with a 0.6% increase in center sites and a 3% increase in center spaces. Interestingly, infant capacity experienced a relatively large increase of 14%. Percentage-wise, it is the largest percent change since 2002 and the largest number increase since the portfolio's inception. This is significant because we know that infant care tends to be the hardest for parents to find since it is the most expensive to provide. We also saw a 4% increase in preschool spaces and a continued decrease of school-age spaces of about 3%. So this is consistent with trends in previous years of decreasing school-age spaces. So now we'll look at family childcare homes and compare, again, the 2021 portfolio data to the 2023 portfolio data. And you'll notice that the number of sites and spaces increased just slightly compared to 2021. So there was a 0.3% increase in sites and a 1% increase in spaces. But while there is an increase in family childcare, the state is far from building back the family childcare supply when compared to the peak in 2008. So when compared with 2008 data, you'll notice that there is actually a loss of 25% of the licensed family childcare supply. We also looked at voucher use by setting as of October 2023. Noting these trends in the EC landscape is important as we also consider where families are choosing childcare for their children, particularly families who are paying with a subsidy voucher. While this is a subset of the child population, it does offer a glimpse into childcare enrollment. And as is evident in the chart, over 40% of children are cared for in family childcare. You'll also notice that about a third of this pie is made up by license exempt family, friend, or neighbor care. We don't have a lot of data to report on FFN care. There isn't a lot of data available. And so we don't report it in the portfolio, but we do want to note that it is a huge part of the ECE landscape and is shown here as evident by this voucher use pie chart as well. So this chart illustrates the makeup of all licensed childcare spaces by setting and type. and age. So because FCCs may care for more than one age group, we cannot break out the ages they may be serving. So they are just represented by one slice versus centers. You'll notice they are broken up by age group. So FCC spaces represent about 27% of total licensed childcare. And this is actually down from 35% when comparing the makeup of licensed childcare in 2008. So in 2008, this red slice was actually 35%, and we see that there is actually a change of proportion to about 27% of all licensed childcare spaces. You'll also notice that center infant spaces, so the center under 2 years slice, is only 5.5% of the total licensed childcare spaces. And we will be talking about this a little bit more in a following slide, so just hold on to that piece of info. Now we're going to pivot a little bit and talk about childcare requests. So in looking at childcare requests, these data are from childcare resource and referral databases and offer a 3-month snapshot of requests for childcare, as Rowena explained at the beginning of this presentation. And we do see that there are slight changes in each category. Infant care, so the under 2 years category, when comparing 2021 and 2023 numbers, increased from 30% to 33%. And as you might remember from the previous pie chart that showed the breakdown of all licensed spaces, licensed center spaces for infants are only 5.5% of the total licensed supply. So this does speak to some of the challenges in care for infants because there aren't a lot of spaces dedicated for infants. So families might have a harder time finding care for infants. There were also some other changes. So the 2 to 5 years category, you'll notice, had a slight decrease from 50% to 46%. And the 6-year and older category had a very slight increase of about 21% to 22%. So now we'll look more closely and examine the regional differences in childcare supply, and again, comparing the 2021 to 2023 data. And in this case, when I say supply, I am referring to licensed childcare spaces. And as you can see, there are pretty significant regional differences in the change of childcare supply. So the Bay Area saw the biggest overall increase for both centers and homes, and an overall increase of about 7%, probably driving this statewide increase. The North is the only region that experienced both a decline in both centers and homes and saw an overall decrease as a region. The Central Valley saw a slight increase in homes and centers, and the South saw an overall increase despite a decrease in homes. So while these are the overall changes in the regions, there are pretty significant variations across counties as well. So we're going to dive into that. So these maps are looking at percent change in all licensed spaces and comparing, again, that 2021 to 2023 data. And counties that are in orange or red color are showing a decrease, while a green or like a yellow-green color represent an increase. I also want to note that you will be seeing large increases or decreases in percent change. This is because when a smaller county, for example, has even 5 site closures, but say there are only 10 total childcare sites in that county, the 5 sites that closed made up of about half of that county's licensed childcare supply. So while 5 sites may not seem like a lot relative to other larger counties, they do represent a large proportion of childcare in smaller counties. So that's just something to keep in mind when we're looking at these maps. You will see pretty significant, 45 decrease or 100 increase, and that is why, because proportionally, they're pretty significant. So we'll start here in the north. I pulled out some of the darker, red or green shaded counties so we can take a look at those. And in the north, Glenn particularly had about a 33% increase, while Modoc had about a 45% decrease. And then shifting over to the Bay Area, Alameda, San Francisco, and Santa Clara all saw an over 10% increase. And as you might remember, there was a pretty significant increase in the Bay Area. So these might have significantly impacted that increase. Now, shifting over to the Central Valley, Mariposa saw about a 64% increase, while Inyo saw about a 39% decrease. And then in the South, San Bernardino saw about a 14% increase, while Imperial saw about a 25% decrease. And again, this is all licensed spaces, so considering both centers and family child care homes combined. So now we'll take a close look at family child care spaces specifically. So in the north, overall, there was a 2% decrease in FCC spaces, with Modoc seeing a 32% decrease and Glen seeing a 38% increase. In the Bay Area, overall, there was a 7% increase. Alameda, San Francisco, and San Benito all saw an over 20% increase, again, driving those overall increases. Calavera saw a 16% decrease in the Bay Area. Now, shifting over to the Central Valley, there wasn't a huge change in the Central Valley overall, less than 1% increase, with King seeing a 23% increase and Inyo seeing a 39% decrease. And then in the South, overall, there was a 1% increase. San Bernardino and Santa Barbara both saw an over 10% increase, while Imperial, on the other hand, saw a 30% decrease. And again, this is FCC spaces. When looking at licensed center spaces, in the north, overall, there was a decrease of 2%, with Modoc seeing a 53% decrease and Plumas seeing a 114% increase. In the Bay Area, overall, a pretty significant increase again of about 6%. Calaveras and Santa Clara both seeing about a 20% increase, while Amador saw a 14% decrease. And in the Central Valley, overall, there was a 2% increase in center spaces, Mariposa seeing a significant 155% increase, while Inyo, Mono, and Madera had about a 30% decrease. And then in the South, overall, there was a 1% increase, Riverside seeing a 15% increase, San Bernardino a 13% increase, and Imperial a 19% decrease. So all this to say that you will notice that there's a mosaic of reds, greens, oranges, and yellows, and that just is to show that there are significant variations, not only within regions, but within counties. And I'm sure if we dug even deeper and looked at the local level, what the changes are, there would be even more variation. So that's just something to keep in mind. And with that, I'll pass it back to Rowena to talk about some family budgets and policy implications of the data. You're muted, Rowena.
Thank you. Thank you, Natalie. So next we'll go over some family budget profiles, and these are based off of a monthly income. So as we know, the cost of licensed childcare does place a burden on most families' budget. The childcare portfolio includes monthly family budget profiles, looking at the estimated costs of necessities such as housing, food, childcare, healthcare, transportation, tax liability, and other necessities. Here we're looking at a family of 4 with 2 children in childcare. With a monthly income at the state median, the family will spend about 25% of their budget on licensed childcare. And this assumes full-time care for an infant in a family childcare home program and full-time care for a preschool age child in a childcare center. In this scenario, a family spends almost 2/3 of their income on housing, food, and childcare alone. You'll also notice here that this family does fall short of meeting all of their needs, covering all their needs by just over $2,000 a month. In the next slide, In this scenario, we look at the cost of care for a family that is income eligible for a child care subsidy. Using the same assumptions, a family of four that is eligible for a child care subsidy and not enrolled in a subsidy program will spend about 28% of their budget on child care. And if that family does have a subsidy, they'll spend about 7% of their budget on child care. And though the family is receiving a subsidy, oftentimes they are paying either a co-payment or a family fee. The cost that we used here is based off of a family fee for a family of four. However, we know that, for some families, even the family fee is still a burden on their budgets. Next, we wanted to share a story from a parent residing in Contra Costa County who had the challenges of finding affordable childcare close to where she lived. Though she had a subsidy voucher when searching for care in high-cost areas, the reimbursement rate for providers accepting those vouchers doesn't always cover the program's tuition, and the difference must be covered by the family, as you'll note in her story here. So, families do have to find solutions to meet their needs. And in this case, this parent had to find childcare in a different location, was on a wait list, and eventually was able to find care that fit her needs and had a smaller fee that was affordable to them. Just wanted to share this parent's story. And so next, just want to provide a data recap of the data highlights that we saw throughout our presentation today. So first off, we saw overall that licensed childcare in California did increase. However, care is still only available for about 26% of children with working parents. And as you saw with our maps, and as Natalie described, there are substantial regional and county variation across the state, and particularly in the north, where we saw that there was an overall decrease in supply. About half of the counties in that region had a decrease in their licensed childcare spaces. With regard to center-based care, again, we saw that infant capacity experienced the largest year-over-year increase since the portfolio's inception. And that was an increase of 6,552 compared to 2001. And while FCC spaces increase, they are far from pre-recession levels. And attention to the licensed FCC supply is important, as we know they're likely to be affordable and offer more flexible hours, including non-traditional hours of care. And as we saw, more than 2/3 of voucher enrollments were in FFN care at 32.8% and family child care at 41.9%. And lastly, child care, as I mentioned earlier, is a large portion of a family's budget. And so, want to, as I'll talk through in our policy priorities, the importance of being able to support our families in finding accessible and affordable childcare. So with all of this data in mind, we've outlined a few policy priorities that support growth and stabilization of childcare programs and ensuring that families have equitable access to a range of childcare options that meet their families' unique needs. And at the center of this is the need for adequate and steady public funding. For providers, know that a well-compensated and supported childcare workforce is crucial to the growth and stabilization of California's childcare landscape. One route to addressing wages for the workforce is through rate reform. California's reimbursement rates for subsidized childcare are currently informed by market prices, which are typically lower than the true cost of providing care. As a result of the low rates, providers often operate at a loss, leaving them vulnerable to closing their business. The field must continue to push to reform the state's reimbursement rate structure, including utilizing an alternative methodology for estimating and reimbursing at the true cost of care, which also includes a living wage for the workforce. Secondly, overhead costs to operate a childcare business persist regardless of whether a child attends each day. Providers need predictable revenue to sustain and plan for their businesses. The state addressed this during the pandemic by paying subsidy providers based on enrollment rather than child attendance. And so codifying this practice will ensure that providers can plan accordingly for their businesses. And lastly, in light of the actions happening at the federal level, cuts to federal funding for childcare could have a devastating effect on contracted programs and the landscape writ large. These include Head Start and Early Head Start programs. In 2023, is estimated that there were about 1,835 Head Start or Early Head Start centers in California, with about 94,577 funded slots. And given that the current licensed supply cannot meet the needs of working families, the loss of Head Start programs will only exacerbate that need. Can move on to the next slide and look at it from our family perspective. Thanks, Natalie. So for families, we want to ensure that all families have access to affordable childcare options. And to achieve this means building the supply and sustainability of quality childcare, which requires fair pay for childcare providers, increased professional development opportunities, access to resources, and reductions in administrative burdens and costs for programs. This also means working towards a universal childcare system that includes the mixed delivery system. Licensed childcare costs make up a large portion of a family's budget. And this, combined with the limited supply of licensed childcare options, makes childcare inaccessible for families. A universal childcare system would ensure that childcare in the setting of their choice is available and affordable for all families who need or want it. And lastly, we believe that it's important to examine the effects of transitional kindergarten implementation on the ECE landscape. Data from the portfolio suggests that there were shifts in center-based care, particularly towards an increase in licensed infant capacity. A recent study from the Center of the Study of Child Care Employment, examining enrollment and staffing trends, stated that while TK expansion represents an addition to California's ECE options, in practice, it is reconfiguring California's market for early care and education. Their report found that in childcare centers, enrollment dropped for all age groups during the pandemic and has recovered most among infants and toddlers and least for 4 and 5-year-olds. And large FCC providers, so those serving up to 14 children, have likewise seen a decline in preschool age enrollment. Again, this is data from a study from the Center of the Study for Childcare Employment. And as we wrap up, we do want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank the child care resource and referral agencies and staff for their time and effort in collaborating with us to gather the data to make this report possible. Again, the network works in close collaboration with the child care resource and referral agencies to ensure accuracy of the data that is used for this report. R&Rs also have an important role in their communities, serving as a critical childcare infrastructure, supporting families in understanding and navigating their child care choices, as well as supporting the broader childcare provider community. So again, just a huge thanks to our childcare resource and referral partners. All right, so that wraps up our presentation on the 2023 California Child Care Portfolio. I'm sure you all are wondering when it will be available. The portfolio will be posted later today on the California Child Care Resource and Referral website, and we'll put a link to that in the chat. And the recording will be available on our website as well. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here today and listening to the presentation. And I think we can go to the Q&A to answer a few questions. All right. We'll go ahead and look at the Q&A. All right. One of the questions that we had, Natalie, and maybe I'll share this with you. For the increase in center capacity, is there any data on whether it's driven by either centers expanding or new center licensees?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We did not capture that in the portfolio data. I'm sure that we could work with licensing to see what those changes are, but it's not considered in the portfolio data. So we just looked at the slots in total and didn't look at whether they were expanding or if they were, there was also a question on if a licensed facility moved, did we track that licensed facility? No, it was only based on the number of spaces that were present at that point in time.
And similarly on capacity, is there any information either from the R&Rs on the typical difference between capacity and actual enrollment?
Yeah, so we don't look at actual enrollment in the childcare portfolio. We only look at the capacity of open spaces. So we don't take into consideration if those spaces are filled.
Thank you. And I noticed that a couple of folks have raised their hand. Please use the Q&A function to type in your question, or I think there might be a way to, oh no, I think the chat might be disabled. Yeah, I think the best way would be to type in your question into the Q&A. It'd be great for us to be able to also capture the questions. Let's see. Okay, I think you answered that question in terms of the change in location in terms of percent change. Yeah, Natalie.
I do see a question about significant differences. And I do want to point out that when I say significant differences, I mean it more descriptively than statistically. So thank you for pointing that out, Paula. Yeah, it's not that we did an analysis to see if there are significant, statistically significant differences. I was using it more as a descriptive term to show that there was a larger or pretty steep increase or decrease.
We also just got a question about whether Head Start centers are included in this data, and yes, they are. All licensed childcare centers with contracts or without contracts are included in the data. The question, do you include total number of centers and total number of homes by region, county, etc., in the portfolio? It is available statewide and then county by county. And that's about as far as the analysis goes is by county. So we do not have a regional profile, for example, of the portfolio data. And got another question about if we know what percentage of the sites are Head Start sites?
Yes, so we do have We don't have Head Start sites specifically, but we do include the number of, or the percent of centers that have a Head Start, a CDE, CDESP contract in the portfolio. So there will be a percentage available there, statewide and also county by county.
There's a question in here on, why we talked a bit about data from 2008 for some of the slides that we have. And I think, 2008, I think especially for family childcare represented kind of the peak of it for that setting in particular, that childcare. And I think the Great Recession was also a turning point where we saw huge declines in childcare overall, and especially for family childcare. And in the years that have followed the Great Recession, we have still yet not kind of built back our family childcare supply to that date and time. So that's why we've used 2008 as kind of a key point in the data that we describe.
I also see a question on, do we provide data on tribal childcare? So we provide data on all licensed childcare. So if the tribal childcare is licensed, then it is included. I know there are some counties where license exempt center care, specifically on reservations, tends to be the most common type of care for those counties. But we did not include any license exempt center care for the portfolio. So that is something to keep in mind, that there is still this piece of the childcare landscape that we didn't capture, but that is still very important to some communities. All right, so I think we answered all questions in the Q&A box. But of course, if you do have any additional questions as you're reviewing the data, you are welcome to reach out to us. I will be providing an email in the chat so that you all can reach out once you look at the report yourselves and see if you have any questions. So. And with that,
yeah, thank you again, everybody.
Yes, thank you all for attending and for your patience. I know it took us a little longer to release this portfolio, so appreciate all of your patience.
Thank you. Great job, guys.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day, y'all.